In the natural physical world, there is rhythm and there is motion. You can't catch hold of it. You can't describe it. But you can imagine. And so the clock is just like a ruler and is as abstract as a ruler. And time, then, obviously, is a way of measuring motion. And you're driven by time. In other words, the continuum in which everything occurs is, of course, basically what you are. And we do, don't we, live in a culture, or a complex of cultures in the Western world where we are literally driven by time. Your forms, your bodies, your this, your that, it's all oscillating like everything oscillates. It wouldn't hum if it didn't. Are we going to take time seriously? That is the big question.
Is really just by way of an opening theme.
I want to mention, by way of explaining my own approach to these matters, that my kind of study in communication is really a study of transformation.
Whereas information theory and all the existing theories of communication that I know of are theories of transportation. All the official theories of communication studied in the schools of North America are theories of how you move data from point A to point B to point C with minimal distortion.
That is not what I study at all.
Information theory I understand and I use, but information theory is a theory of transportation.
And it has nothing to do with the effects which these forms have on you.
Here you see the streaming of the chloroplasts within the cells of elodiograss. I have found that under full natural sunlight, all of these little chloroplasts get into a streaming pattern and go in an orderly fashion around and around to each end of the cell. But if the light is filtered through ordinary glass that cuts out the ultraviolet, or, as in this case, an ordinary incandescent microscope light source lacking the ultraviolet was used, many of the chloroplasts drop out of the streaming pattern and form a sluggish clump.
I'm predicting pretty close to 100% saturation. Look at that. I'm right. Probably 90% by now. It's the first thing you do in the morning. When you hold up and you wake up, you check your little robot. It's on your body for almost the entire
cell
day.
Or another. When I placed a red filter in the light source, restricting the wavelengths to just the longer ones that we see as red, some of the chloroplasts responded in their normal pattern, some dropped out of the streaming altogether, and others started shortcutting across without going all the way to the end of the cell. This would appear to be affecting the normal process of photosynthesis and the resulting cell chemistry.
Not only was I interrupted, I also kept on reaching out for my phone, hoping that perhaps there was a notification. And I wasn't doing this consciously. It was exactly like Pavlov's dog, but my bell was my ringtone, and my sugar was that one notification a day you might get that makes you happy. As it turns out, we got so addicted to technology that 9 out of 10 people today experience something called phantom vibrations.
This picture shows some aphids on the leaf of an orange tree. shortly after radar equipment was installed at a nearby airport a number of years ago. I noticed that every few seconds, all the aphids would tense up in unison and do sort of a little dance, as you see in the picture. Upon further investigation, I found that the interval of time between the activity of each dance coincided exactly with the rotation of the radar rotor device at the airport.
This is when you have your phone in your pocket and you thought it vibrated, you pull it out, there's nothing.
Now, if you went back 20 years in time to a coffee shop and you said that was the way a coffee shop was going to look in the future, you'd be out of your mind. People looking at these little pieces of silicon in various sizes, not really communicating with each other, communicating with their little robot buddies.
An idiot means a very private person. That's a Greek word, meaning a very private person. I'm losing my idiot status steadily. I'm becoming less and less private. I'd much rather be an idiot. The book, in this picture, the assumption was made that the book was the source and cause of all idiotism, all individuality, and that the new media will turn us all into collective automata robots. This is a rather simple-minded idea.
And that the new media will turn us all into collective automata robots.
Is this where we're going next? Are we effectively softened up enough as humans with our robotic connections to the world that we are actually going to be accepting more, a lot more? And when you learn about what this is called virtual reality, you will be amazed at what it can do.
And how we won't be able to tell the difference anymore between that and actual reality, and our augmented selves, right down to the editing of our genetic code.
Знаете, что человек приобретает возможность влезать в генетический код, созданный или природой, или люди с религиозными взглядами говорят Господом Богом. Последствия практически какие из этого могут наступить? Это значит, что уже можно это представить, даже не очень теоретически, а уже можно практически представить, что человек может создавать человека с заданными характеристиками. Это может быть гениальный математик, это может быть гениальный музыкант, военный, человек, который может воевать без страха и без чувства сострадания и сожаления и без боли. То есть, вы понимаете, человечество может вступить, и, скорее всего, вступит в ближайшее время, в очень сложный и очень ответственный период своего развития и существования. И вот то, о чем я сейчас сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной
I then
бомбы.
decided to change the red filter and insert a blue one, letting through the shorter wavelengths. And as you can see, some of the chloroplasts continue to respond normally, some have dropped out altogether, but those shortcutting go down to the upper corner before they make their shortcut. I removed the color filters and added a very low level of long wavelength ultraviolet or black light to the ordinary incandescent microscope light source to come as close as possible, in a crude way, to the full natural spectrum of sunlight. And you see just about all of the chloroplasts resuming their normal screaming pattern. At the end of the day, no matter how much I would increase the light intensity, the chloroplasts would just run down like a dead battery and refuse to respond any further until they had had their normal dark night rest period. This points up the importance of the seasonal changes in the length of day and darkness, or what is commonly referred to as the periodicity of light. The first significant response to the different lighting conditions was noted in the tails of the C38 strain of mice, which are extremely susceptible to spontaneous tumor development. When housed under pink fluorescent 14 hours a day for 3 months, the tails became spotted and severe lesions occurred, causing the abrupt curling at the end. The tails of the animals receiving the natural daylight through the air curtain device remained perfectly normal. At the end of a 3-month period, some of the animals were transferred from the pink fluorescent to the air curtain compartment, and after 30 days, the condition of the tails became perfectly normal. The animals remaining under the pink fluorescent light for 6 months developed a condition of complete necrosis, or, in other words, lost their tails.
Many educators think that the problem in education is just to get the information through, get it past the barrier, the opposition of the young.
Effectively merge with AI by improving that the neural link between your cortex and your digital extension of yourself, which already, like I said, already exists, just has a bandwidth issue. And then effectively you become an AI human symbiote, and if that then is widespread with anyone who wants it can have it, then we solve the control problem as well.
Humans are so slow.
Humans are so slow. Yes, exactly.
Yes, 5G will connect the Internet of everything. If something can be connected, it will be connected in the 5G world. Hundreds of billions of microchips connected in products from pill bottles to plant waterers, requiring massive deployment of small cells. We won't wait for the standards. We must reject the notion that the 5G future will be the sole provenance of urban areas. 5G revolution will touch all corners.
Humans are so slow. Humans are so slow. Yes, exactly.
Just to move it, and keep it going. I have no interest much in that theory.
Everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound.
My theory or concern is with what do these media do to the people who use them?
The poultry industry has learned that egg production can be increased by lengthening the daytime periods with artificial light, and especially during the short daylight hours of the winter. More recent research by a number of scientists has indicated that light entering the eyes influences the pituitary and pineal glands by means of neurochemical channels that are independent of the optic nerve. These master glands control the entire endocrine system and the resulting basic body chemistry through the production and release of hormones. Thus, it appears that the conversion of light energy into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis in plants carries on into animal life in a much more improved and more sophisticated way.
Darwinian theory of nature and evolution without recognizing human technology as environmental stimuli. In order for Darwinian theory to unify the field of experience and properly explain evolution, it must address the social, biological environment human technologies must create through our native interface. From our solid genetic hardware to the newly discovered epigenetic software, we are nurtured by the nature of technology.
Here's a pigment epithelial cell from the retina of a rabbit's eye, as seen through a microscope. These cells are located right behind the rods and cones, but are thought to have no visibility function. These pictures were made in connection with a drug toxicity test to see what the effects of various tranquilizing drugs might be that were known to cause various side effects. I very quickly found that the color of the filter used in the light source of the microscope to increase the contrast of the pictures photographically had a far greater effect on the cells than the drugs being tested. With the blue filter, the cells seem to go through all sorts of contortions, as you see here. With the red filter, the response was entirely different, an apparent weakening in the cell walls or the cell membrane, which would rupture, allowing the cytoplasm or the contents to run out, and of course, killing the cells. I used a water cooling condenser and a heat-absorbing filter, so I'm certain it was not a matter of a difference of temperature. Whenever a color filter was used more than a few hours, there would be no more normal cell division or mitosis. This raises the question of what effect colored filters like sunglasses may have when placed in front of the eyes.
Critical phenomena illustrates the perpetual flow of information as vibratory process, and from this perspective we may understand that evolution must be motivated by all units of information which pass through space-time. Darwin failed to see the environment as one programmable system of interaction. Thus he failed to include human artifacts as biological information loops. Through applied consciousness or intelligent selection, we are in fact brainwashed and gene-washed by our own artifacts.
What did writing do to the people who invented it and used it? What do the other media of our time do to the people who use it? is a transformation theory, how people are changed by the instruments they employ.
Now, if such propositions apply to the world, but are not, so to speak, read off from the world by experience, by observation, how do we arrive at them?
Well, yes. One has to introduce here, I think, one of Kant's most important distinctions between what he called things in themselves, or the world as it is in itself, and appearances. On the question of things in themselves, Kant would have said we can't make any demands. Things in themselves simply are as they are, and there's nothing we can do about that. But if you move to the topic of the world as we experience it, as it presents itself to us as an object of experience, to the world of what he called appearances, then he said it's a different matter, because there are certain conditions, he claimed, which any world must satisfy if it is to be a possible object of experience at all.
For us?
For, well, us and other people, I think,
Yes.
too.
Yes.
He thought it a crucial fact that the world is a common object of experience to an indefinite array of subjects of experience. And if there is to be such a world that can be experienced and known about in common to a community of subjects of experience, then, he argued, there are conditions which it must satisfy. And we can say a priori that appearances must satisfy these.
You've been quoted as saying that you don't necessarily agree with everything that you say.
I have no point of view, as for example now. See, I couldn't possibly have a point of view. I'm just moving around and picking up information from many directions. No, a point of view means a static fixed position, and you can't have a static fixed position in the electric age. It's impossible to have a point of view in the electric age and have any meaning at all. You've got to be everywhere at once, whether you like it or not. You have to be participating in everything going on at the same time, and that is not a point of view.
Would it be correct to put what you've just said in the following sort of way, that what there is for us to experience or perceive or know must, of course, depend on what there is to experience or perceive or know, but it must also depend on what apparatus we have for experiencing or seeing or knowing.
Yes.
And that the apparatus that we have is a contingent matter. I mean, to use a modern example, we happen to be equipped to interpret electromagnetic waves of some frequencies but not others. That's to say, we can receive and interpret heat waves and light rays, but we don't receive and interpret radio waves and X-rays.
Yes.
And it's imaginable that we might apprehend reality in entirely different terms from those that we do.
Heliotropical, turning us all toward the eastern sun. Not time.
Life is not a dictionary, it's a thesaurus.
Meaning all times are simultaneous now, all cultures are simultaneous. There is no time that fills our focus.
And I feel like a missionary to a clitoris.
Many times, all times, just as in a dream at nighttime, all that we ever were collectively is now simultaneous.
Now, Kant is saying, this being so, for us to be able to experience anything at all, it must be such as is apprehensible by our apparatus, by the apparatus we've got.
Yes, yes.
Now, that's not to say that nothing else can exist, but only that it can't, so to speak, exist for us, that we can't know it or apprehend it. Is that right?
Well, I would qualify that in one way. Kant didn't, I think, want to get into considerations about what our sensory equipment specifically is. I mean, what kind of eyes and ears we have. I think he was trying to say something more general than that the notion of a subject of experience presented with a world as an object of experience requires that it should have sensory capacities of some kind and intellectual and conceptual capacities of some kind.
There is no longer an historical time. There is only a not time left to mankind, or a night time, or a dream world. But the old visual time, like clock time, is fragmented and segmented into little bits. That is what we call time. Time marches on. but also backwards, sideways, up and down.
Color is vibration, vibration is sound. Sound resonates through the mouth. Check it out, what I say vibrates no less than 9 ways. South, southeast, west, southwest, east, north, northeast, northwest. And the black and white images fade to gray sound waves.
But to the print man, time simply marches on. There isn't any other direction possible.
Time is an illusion of energy.
For the print.
Your energy
But
determines
for
what
the
it
ear
is.
man, time moves in all directions simultaneously.
But he didn't want to say they must be of this specific kind or that. I mean, he wouldn't have been interested in whether our eyes were different from those of kestrels, say. I mean, just that we must have some way of perceiving.
Yes. But the point then is that we bring certain, as it were, predispositions to bear, and only what fits into those predispositions can be experienced by us.
That's absolutely right.
What we call rationality is pictorial space, connected, continuous, related. What we call the irrational, the intuitive, depth, ESP, LSD, this is discontinuous, unconnected, non-uniform, iconic. All dreams. Your dreams at night, anybody's dreams, are iconic. There is no pictorial connection or vanishing point in any dream image. Why? Very simple reason. You're not using your eyes at all. You're using all your senses. Now, why do we dream? What is the function of dreaming? Because it is well known in experiments that if you stop people from dreaming, they go mad.
Dreams keep me alive.
I mean, if you interrupt people's dreams at night, and it's easy to tell when people are dreaming by you simply lift the lid and see whether the eye is moving, and then you wake them up, stop the dream. You do this night after night, they go out of their minds.
Dreams keep me alive. You can't take them from me.
Why? What is the function of dreaming? Purification, purging by repetition. You run through the images of the day.
I wrote my first doctrine in confinement. Between the choices I made and choices made for me. Reminds me of a story I should tell you in the morning. I moisten my fingers and turn the page. I must say, you're very sophisticated for your age. I'm amazed you never have to be told to behave. You raise your hand to speak and respond to your name. I remember the day I had changed, the way I was struck by lightning in the rain. Maybe some other time I'll tell you what I became. I can tell you that I waned in the pain and my shame. It is written in books and carved into skins. It is etched into every metaphor from within.
In dreaming is a pure poet. Incredible imaginative constructions.
I would suggest that in dreams the critical faculty is suspended completely. And the critical faculty is the result of an eye bias, the ability to stand back from a situation and critically analyze it.
Mr. Parker has just given Coleridge's definition of poetry, a willing suspension of disbelief. In dreams, you believe everything.
Such is life. Artists egg McMuffins at night. No answers, so let us watch these dances. Structure and form, gracefully being born on the palette of dark grays, concaves and spirals. Kaleidoscopes into an eyeful. It ripples, then it titles. Vacillates, then it virals.
In a world of intense visual bias, the dream is probably compensatory and will feed in the other senses to make that a complete experience. And I'm going to suggest then that if you have primitives living in a largely tactile, oral, kinetic society, it may be possible that their dreams are more highly visual to compensate. I don't know.
What a golden means, so the overseer gets overseen, and the overhears of the older themes can see the bell but don't know the rings. The rings are not sounds, but circles. You wear these on your virtuals, see through these circles just like Steve Urkel, till it's all universal. And it harmonizing like proportion to the larger size, and it's dynamic in a high standard, so each degree has a part to prize. See, big worlds have little worlds that feed on their velocity, and little worlds have lesser worlds, and so on to viscosity. You look just like how I'ma be.
I wonder if it's ever struck you how curious a thing it is that most of the things that we experience we regard as things that happen to us, which we ourselves do not originate, which are events expressing some sort of power or activity that is external to ourselves.
When I placed bean seeds on wet cotton near the concentration of all these cathodes, the shoots showed a random directional growth, some turning upwards, some sidewards, and a few downwards. But when I shielded the seeds with lead foil, all the shoots followed their normal downward directional growth. In another experiment, time-lapse cameras were used in a standard first-grade classroom, and several hyperactive children may be noted, especially the boy in the immediate foreground.
Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves.
90 days after, the regular cool white fluorescent tubes were replaced with the new type full spectrum fluorescent tubes with radiation shields, there was a marked improvement noted, and the extremely hyperactive boy has voluntarily moved up to the front row. He raises his hand for recognition and is now up at the blackboard taking part in classroom activities. Prior to the time that this new lighting was installed, this particular boy had an extreme learning disability problem, but quickly learned to read within 90 days after the new lights were installed. There was further noted a general average improvement in both the behavior and academic achievement of the entire class. There are, however, other factors that must also be considered. The implications of the biological effects of light and radiation as observed through time-lapse photography are obvious. I sincerely hope that what started strictly as a hobby and intended only for entertainment purposes may help stimulate further greatly needed scientific studies in this very important area of research.
My only crime is my imagination.
And if you consider that,
Imagination encircles
you
the world.
realize that what you mean by yourself is rather narrowly circumscribed. That what I am involves what you are. I don't know who I am unless I know who you are. And you don't know who you are unless you know who I am.
Well, they say they're celebrating icons inside. Do you
Celebrating
believe
icons,
in
boy, that is just the absolute lowest aiming, possibility that we could come up with. It's like icons. Do you believe in icons? I don't believe in personalities. I don't believe that you exist, but there is a wonderful fragrance in the air.
There was a wise rabbi once said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I and you are not you. In other words, we are not separate. We define each other. We're all backs and fronts to
Every
each
nation in every region now has a decision to make.
What have we done to the world? Look what we've done. What about all the peace that you pledged your only son? What about flowers? Is there a time?
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Which of the gods was it that made them quarrel?
You know, you can't, for example, have two sticks. You lean two sticks against each other and they stand up because they support each other. Take one away and the other falls.
I don't believe in icons. I don't believe in personalities. I believe that peace lies beyond personality, beyond invention and disguise, beyond the red S that you wear on your chest that makes bullets bounce off. I believe that it's deeper than that. I believe we're a field of energy dancing for itself.
They interdepend. And so in exactly that way, we and our environment, and all of us and each other, are interdependent systems. We know who we are in terms of other people. We all lock together. And this is, again and again, the serious scientific description of how things happen. And any good scientist knows, therefore, that what you call the external world is as much you as your own body.
We are internally related to everything, not externally related. Consciousness is an internal relationship to the whole. We take in the whole and we act toward the whole. And that internal, whatever we have taken in, determines basically what we are.
This is a moment in the matrix, bro.
Your skin doesn't separate you from the world. It's a bridge through which the external world flows into you, and you flow into it. Just, for example, as a whirlpool in water, you could say because you have a skin, you have a definite shape, you have a definite form. All right? Here is a flow of water, and suddenly it does a whirlpool. And then it goes on. The whirlpool is a definite form, but no water stays put in it. The whirlpool is something the stream is doing. And exactly the same way, the whole universe is doing each one of us. And I see you today, and I recognize you tomorrow, just as I would recognize a whirlpool in a stream. I'd say, oh yes, I've seen that whirlpool before. It's just near so-and-so's house on the edge of the river, and it's always there. So in the same way, when I meet you tomorrow, I recognize you. You're the same whirlpool you were yesterday. But you're moving. The whole world is moving through you. All the cosmic rays, all the food you're eating, the stream of steaks and milk and eggs and everything is just flowing right through you. When you're wiggling the same way, the world is wiggling, the stream is wiggling you. But the problem is, you see, we haven't been taught to feel that way. The myths underlying our culture and underlying our common sense have not taught us to feel identical with the universe, but only parts of it, only in it, only confronting it, aliens.
The fragmenting process, a process of specialism.
And we are, I think, quite urgently in need of coming to feel that we are the eternal universe, each one of us. Otherwise, we're going to go out of our heads. We're going to commit suicide. We're going to commit suicide. Collectively, with courtesy of H-bombs. And, all right, supposing we do, well, that will be that, and there will be life making experiments on other galaxies. Maybe they'll find a better game.
Bohm's theory of wholeness and the implicate order states that there is something like life and mind enfolded in everything.
Well, you see, I think the difficulty is this fragmentation, first of all. Everybody is, all thought is broken up into bits, like this nation, this country, this industry, this profession, and so on, as they can't meet, right? And it's extremely hard to break into that. Now, the second, but that comes about primarily because thought has developed traditionally in a way such that it claims not to be affecting anything, but just telling you the way things are. Therefore, people cannot see that they are creating a problem and then apparently trying to solve it. That is, see, let's take the problem, what problem do you like? Pollution, or the ecology. See, the ecology is not in itself a problem. It works perfectly well by itself. It's due to us, right? It's a problem because we are thinking in a certain way by breaking everything up and each person's doing his own thing, right? Now, therefore, the ecological problem is due to thought, right? But thought thinks it is a problem out there, and I must solve it. Now, that doesn't make sense, because
People moving out, people moving in. Why? Because of the color of their skin. Run, 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 but you sure can't hide. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Vote for me, and I'll set you free. Rap on, brother, rap on. Well, the only person talking about love, man, brother, is the preacher. And it seems nobody's interested in learning but the teacher.
Event is the next category.
Segregation, determination, demonstration, integration, aggravation, humiliation, obligation to our nation. That's what the world is today.
And the band played on.
simultaneously thought is doing all the activities which make the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it.
Many of these kinds of developments begin to occur in many forms at once, at very high speeds. Then it becomes easy to perceive the pattern. When things happen relatively slowly, it's like still shots on a film. If you look at them one at a time, it's very slow. You don't see very much change, but project them at a reasonable speed and the pattern of development becomes perfectly evident. We are now living in a world where things change so rapidly that anybody can spot the configuration, the pattern of change. And we're living increasingly in a world of pattern recognition instead of just classified and isolated items. The whole speed up has tended to make everything much more intelligible and understandable than in the past.
Because simultaneously thought is doing all the activities which make the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it.
Simultaneously thought is doing all the activities which make the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it.
You see, it doesn't stop doing the things which are making the ecological problem, or the national problem, or whatever the problem is.
I've often been puzzled by the fact that the greatest discoveries in the world, when you look back, are perfectly easy. They can be put in a textbook. But the same discovery, when you were looking forward as a problem, impossible. Why is knowledge so easy backwards and so hard forwards?
Everything does. Didn't you know that everything works two ways? Literally. Feedback.
I'm trying to keep my faith. We on an ultralight beam. We on an ultralight beam. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. This is everything.
Everything we do is music.
Illusions of energy. What and when you see.
It's all about the information. It is all about the information. For the information, tune in to Channel Zero. Channel Zero.
Yo, the location is planet Earth.
Now listening to the sounds of a God in the flesh. My lineage is ancient. I come from beyond any place you could imagine. In your imagination, mommy was my spaceship. It took her 9 months to get me here. I finally made it.
You know what war with complex. I'm the mixing board, Optimus Prime. I came here from an advanced time to help the world discover advanced rhymes. Killer Decepticon with the power of my mind. Then bend the fabric of space and travel a straight line. It all started with one, now look what we done. Can just kick back and release it in little pieces for fun. You couldn't even fly a kite in my airstream, no, nigga, that airspace right there's for the BG. You on your last leg, don't try to chase me, motherfucker. Infinity, growing at light speed.
We're not treating it that way, right? So that's the first step in economics, is to say the earth is one household and all that it depends on. it's all one, you see. So now the implicate order would help us to see that, to see everything unfolds everything, that everybody not merely depends on everybody, but actually everybody is everybody in a deeper sense. See, we are the earth because all our substance comes from the earth and goes back. I mean, it's wrong to say it's an environment, you see, it's just surrounding us, because that would be like trying the brain regarding the stomach as part of its environment.
We have to say something like connected with it, essential to it, or to put it in the strongest possible way, it is quite alien to Western thought to conceive that the external world, which is defined as something that happens to you, and your body itself as something that you got caught up with, it is quite alien to our thought to consider all that as you yourself. Because, you see, we have such a myopic view of what oneself is. It's as if, in other words, we selected how much experience is really to be regarded as me.
The root of the word compassion is to feel together. And if people have the same feeling together and are responsible for each other, then you have compassion.
And you don't think it's part of, what's the word, original sin, that human beings in their very nature compete?
Well, I don't think that there is such thing as original sin, and I think it has developed more and more with the growth of our society. That there's no evidence that people in the hunter-gatherer society were all that competitive, but the more you made society big and you had organization and you had to get to the top, the people on the bottom would suffer. There was a drive to compete, naturally.
And do you think that perhaps the desire to compete is a weakness?
Not a weakness, that's a mistake.
Right.
As if you focused your attention on certain restricted areas of the whole panorama of things that you experience, and say, I will take sides with that much of it. Now, we come here right at the start to an extremely important principle, which is the different points of view you get when you change your level of magnification. That is to say, you can look at something with a microscope and see it a certain way. You can look at it with the naked eye and see it in a certain way. You look at it with a telescope and you see it in another way. Now, which level of magnification is the correct one? Well, obviously, they're all correct, but they're just different points of view.
So the first thing we have to do in the long run is to look at our whole way of thinking, which has developed over so many thousands of years. I don't think it was the original way of thinking of the human race at all, but for many complex reasons it came about. Now, that means that people have to make they have to participate, to make a cooperative effort, to have a dialogue, a real dialogue in which we will not merely exchange opinions, but actually listen deeply to the views of other people without resistance. And we cannot do this if we hold to our own opinion and resist the other. It doesn't mean we should accept the other, but we have to be able to look at all the opinions as suspended, as it were, in front of us without carrying them out, without suppressing.
You can, for example, look at a newspaper photograph under a magnifying glass, and where with the naked eye you will see a human face, with the magnifying glass you will just see a profusion of dots, rather meaninglessly scattered. But as you stand away from that connection of dots, which all seem to be separate and apart from each other, they suddenly arrange themselves into a pattern. And you see that these individual dots add up to some kind of sense. Now you'll see at once from this illustration that maybe you, when you take a myopic view of yourself, as most of us do, but you may add up to some kind of sense that is not apparent to you in your ordinary consciousness. When we examine our blood streams under a microscope, we see there's one hell of a fight going on. All sorts of microorganisms are chewing each other up. And if we got overly fascinated with our view of our own blood streams in the microscope, we should start taking sides. which would be fatal, because the health of our organism depends on the continuance of this battle. What is, in other words, conflict at one level of magnification is harmony at a higher level. And could it possibly be, therefore, that we, with all our problems, conflicts, neuroses, sicknesses, political outrages, wars, tortures, and everything that goes on in human life, are a state of conflict which can be seen in a larger perspective as a situation of harmony?
But this wholeness, this new consciousness, this wholeness, is that something that you can only glimpse, perhaps in, like, as you might have a glimpse of heaven, or is it something scientific? I mean, can you think your way through it?
Not really completely. Wholeness is an attitude or an approach, but it can be given a scientific realization, you see. Because of relativity and quantum theory, we can, if we wish, look on the world as a whole.
Well, it is claimed, you see, that some human beings have broken through to that vision, that they've slipped somehow or other into states of consciousness where they see the apparent disintegration and disorganization of everyday life as the functioning of a totality which at its level is completely harmonious. And you can say, aha, at last I see, I got the point. I've seen how all this makes sense. But what this insight depended upon was your overcoming the illusion that space separates things.
I began more or less accepting the ideas of Niels Bohr. I wrote a book called Quantum Theory based on that, and I was feeling that the question really was, what is the nature of reality? You see, Bohr's view is based on an epistemology of saying that all we can discuss is our knowledge of reality.
Yeah.
And and I felt dissatisfied with that finally. Well, because it did not give any clear concept of reality. You see, it only discussed what could be observed and measured. Now, if you said, okay, that's all it is, then we'd say we will accept it on that basis, but then we would raise the question, what can we say? Well, reality would mean something that would have some existence independently of being known. You see, to say it might be that we would know it, but it did not require that we know it in order to exist.
Yeah.
Now, it was difficult to see how this could be sustained, finally, in Bohr's view. Now, I tried to get some idea of what might be the process which was implied by the mathematics of the quantum theory. And this process is what I call unfoldment, that the mathematics itself suggests a movement in which everything, in which any particular element of space may have a field which unfolds into the whole, and the whole folds and enfolds into it. So you have this movement, and I call this the implicate or enfolded order, which unfolds into the explicate order where everything is separate. Now, the implicate order, everything is internally related to everything. Everything contains everything, right? So everybody has many experiences of this implicate order. The most obvious one is ordinary consciousness, where consciousness enfolds everything that you know or see, right? And now, it doesn't merely enfold the universe, but also you act according to that content. So therefore, you are internally related to the whole. In this sense, you act according to your consciousness of the whole. So you're not acting mechanistically in the sense of being pushed and pulled by objects in the surroundings, but rather according to your consciousness of them, you act.
Yeah.
So if you're not conscious of them, you cannot act intelligently toward them. But so consciousness is really our most immediate experience of this implicate order.
That is to say, the space, the interval between your body and mine. The interval created by birth at one end and death at the other. And then after somebody's death, then somebody else's birth. These are events with intervals between them. And normally we regard these intervals in time and these intervals in space as having no importance, no function. We tend to see the universe itself as really consisting in all the stars and galaxies. That's what it is. That's what we notice. But the space in which all this happens is sort of written off as something that isn't really there. But what one has to realize is that the space is an essential function of the things in the space. After all, you can't have separate stars unless there is a space around them. Eliminate the space and you will see you couldn't have this phenomenon at all. And vice versa. You couldn't have the space. They wouldn't be there in any sense whatsoever if there weren't the bodies in it. So the bodies in the space and the space are two aspects of a single continuum. They're related together in exactly the same way as a back and a front. And you just don't get one without the other. So the moment you see that intervals, that space is connective, you can understand at once how you are not just to be exclusively defined as a flash of consciousness that occurs between two eternal darknesses, which is the popular common sense view which Western man has of his own life. That you consider that in the darkness that comes before your birth, there was no you, and in the eternal darkness that follows your death, there is likewise no you.
Nets of consciousness that are finer and finer. Or we may think of capturing finer and finer aspects of the implicate order. I think there's an intelligence that's implicit there, you see, to say that a kind of intelligence unfolds. The source of intelligence is not necessarily in the brain, you see, the ultimate source, but much more enfolded into the whole. Now, the question of whether you want to call it God, that depends on what you mean by the word, you see, because taking it as a personal God might restrict it in some way.
I think science has begun to replace religion as the major source of the world view. And therefore, if science takes a fragmentary worldview, it will have a profound effect on consciousness.
But science is always seen as measurement. Is that no longer true?
Well, science is whatever people make of it. You see, science has changed over the ages, and it's different now from a few hundred years ago, and it could be different again. Now, there's no intrinsic reason why science must necessarily be measurement. This is another historical development which has come about over the past few centuries. It's entirely contingent and not absolutely necessary.
And when Einstein produced his special theory, which the Times newspaper of London dismissed as being nonsense, was he moving towards wholeness?
Yes, he definitely was. He moved eventually toward a view of field theory where everything was one field, all the fields merging. So it was a step toward wholeness, although not, it was a limited step, but still it was the beginning.
And I'm going to discuss these matters not by appealing to any special spooky knowledge, as if I had been traveling on the higher planes and knew all my previous incarnations and therefore could tell you authoritatively that you are much more than this individuality. I'm going to do it on a basis of complete common sense, that everybody has access to the facts. And that just what you have to realize is that life is a pattern of immense complexity. And what you call yourself as a living organism, say, I am my whole body at the very least. Now, what is that body? That body is recognizable, and I recognize my friends when I meet them again, with luck, and you recognize me. Although the last time any of you saw me, I was absolutely something entirely different from what I am now. Just as the flame of a candle is never a constant. A flame of a candle is a stream of hot gas. Only you say the flame of the candle as if it were a constant. Well, it is a recognizably constant pattern. The spear-shaped outline of the flame and its coloration is a constant pattern. But in exactly the same way, we are all constant patterns. And that's all we are. The only thing constant about us at all is the doing rather than the being. It's the way we behave. the way we dance. Only there's no we that dances. There's just the dancing. Just as the flame is the streaming of hot gas, just as a whirlpool in a river is a whirling of streaming water. There is no thing that whirlpools. There is the whirlpool. And in the same way, each one of us is a very, very delightfully complex undulation of the energy of the whole universe. Only by our process of miseducation, we've been deprived of the knowledge of that fact, not as if though there was someone to blame for this, because it's always with our own tacit consent. Because life is basically a game of hide and seek.
And if we get to wholeness, are we then in heaven? I mean, where else is there to go?
We'll never get there, you see. It's not a place you can get. The wholeness, I say, is a kind of attitude or an approach to the whole of life. It's a way, if we can have a coherent approach to reality, then reality will respond coherently to us. But nature has been tremendously affected by our way of thinking on the earth. Nature is now being destroyed. There's very little left on the earth which wasn't affected by how we were thinking.
And if we have coherence, in what way will our behavior be seen to be different?
Well, we will produce the results we intend rather than the results we don't intend.
Yes.
That's the first big change. Then we will be more orderly, harmonious, we will be happier. I think we could put all that in there. But the major source of unhappiness is that we are incoherent and therefore producing results that we don't really want. And then trying to overcome them, or we keep on producing them. The question is, what is the real origin of consciousness?
That's exactly the case. Where did it come from? Was there a time when there was no consciousness?
Well, I don't think it originates in time. You see, I think it's a potential of the whole universe. Wholeness will arise between us all in participation rather than separately.
But if you went as a hermit into a cave...
Well, you still have nature.
That's true.
We are internally related to everything,
yes,
not externally related. Consciousness is an internal relationship to the whole. We take in the whole and we act toward the whole. And that internal, whatever we have taken in, determines basically what we are. I read somewhere that the hunter-gatherers would get all their food in about 15 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and we have not yet approached anything like that. So, but leaving that aside, I think we need to set aside some time for this. We need a period of emptiness and quiet where we can go into this. It doesn't mean that we should do nothing else.
Because life is pulsation. On and off. Here it is, and now it isn't. And by being this pulsation, we know it's there. See, you don't know what you mean by on unless you know what you mean by off. That's why when we want to awaken someone, we knock at the door. It's not enough to slam the door once with your fist and make a big noise, but you keep up a pulsation, because that by its on and offness attracts attention. All life, you see, is this flickering in and out. Only there are enormous rhythms in it. There are very fast flickering ins and outs, like the reaction of light upon our eyes, such that if I take a lighted cigarette in the dark and I spin it, you will see a circle of fire. Because the reflection of that cigarette tip on your retina lasts, it endures. Just in the same way as on a radar screen. An image stays a little while until it's revivified by another round. So in that way, you see, you notice continuity. And in the same way then, you notice the continuity of a light, because although, like say, with an arc lamp is actually a flickering light. And that's why they don't allow arc lights to be used in any shop where there's a circular saw moving. Because sometimes the flickering speed of the arc light so synchronizes with the turning speed of the teeth on the blade that the teeth look as if they're not moving. And so anybody who might put his hand on the blade would have it chopped off thinking it was a still one. So in this way, very fast impulses are looked upon us as constant. And we see where there are fast impulses a solid thing. When you look at the blade of a propeller or an electric fan, the separated 4 or 3 blades become a solid disc, and you cannot throw an egg through it. Well, so in exactly the same way, you can't put your finger through a rock, because the rock is moving too fast for your finger to go through. That's the meaning of the whole phenomenon of hardness. Hardness in nature is immense energy, but acting in a very concentrated space, restricted space, but going to beat hell. That's why you can't get through it.
You have to be sensitive to just the question of delusion. That is, is there incoherence? You have to be sensitive to incoherence. Now, delusion arises when we are not sensitive to incoherence, when we overlook it. There's no guarantee that we can succeed in anything. If anybody claims to have evidence, it's always limited, and you can't trust it either. So in this game, there's no guarantee at all. As we can't trust anybody to tell us what's about these things. We have a tremendous resistance to acknowledging incoherence. People are constantly saying everything is all right, there's nothing to worry about. You know, this is all very coherent. Totalitarian regimes are constantly doing that, saying everything is wonderful. That's the key point, to attend to incoherence, first acknowledge it, and then begin to do something about it.
It has to go in waves, I must say. It has to go in waves, you know. There's a time...
Everything is in waves, he says.
No, I said there's a time for anarchy, and there's a time for order. Order creates anarchy, and anarchy creates order.
And
and it goes in waves.
Waves create erosion.
I think that the incoherence has become more dangerous because of the scale of our society and because of technology. That we have all sorts of dangers, such as nuclear war, biological war, chemical war, destruction of nature, and probably we can think of 4 or 5 others, which are brought about by our power. You see, now, the greater power we have, the greater we need coherence. The question, to my mind, is the human being capable of dealing with this situation, which he himself has produced?
Now, from those very tiny fast rhythms, which give us the impression of continuity, there are also in this universe immensely slow rhythms. And these are very difficult for us to keep track of. And they impress us and depress us as our own life and death, as our coming and going, which goes for what is to us such a slow pace that we can't possibly believe that it is really a rhythm. We think of it as our birth, as something quite unique that could never occur again, because we're so close to it, you see, and it's moving so slowly. And so with that point of view, we are, like Marshall McLuhan said, he borrowed a metaphor from me, which is that we are driving a car looking at the rear vision mirror. That means that the environment in which you believe yourself to exist is always a past one. It isn't the one you're actually in. The process of growth, the basic process of biology, is one in which lower orders are always being superseded by higher orders. But the lower order can never figure out, or only very rarely figure out, what the higher order is that's taking over, and may see it as a terrible threat, as total disaster, as the very end, but therefore can never be aware that the principle of growth always has and always will continue. Because that's what's going on. But you never know what the next step is going to be, because if you did know, you wouldn't take it, because it would already be past. Do you understand this? That any certainly known future is an event of which we can say, you've had it. And in that sense, it's past. When we play games, and we say in chess or in bridge or whatever game you're playing, the outcome of the game becomes certain. We at that point cancel the game and begin a new one. Because the whole zest of the thing, and which takes me back to the idea that this whole thing is a hide-and-seek game, is that you don't know what the next order coming up is. But one thing you can be sure of, it will be an order, and it will comprehend you. At the moment, we stand at a time in history where we're beginning to think of the great countdown on the end of the human race. Terrifying possibility that through atomic energy, we may obliterate this planet and turn the whole globe into a star. Maybe that's the way all the stars started. Imagine, this great thing coming up. The countdown on the end. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bang! Poof! Where have you heard that before? You sit on the seashore and you hear the waves going in and out. And you don't stop to think. That's what you're doing. That's what the whole business is doing. And there are places where the wave mounts and mounts and it gets too big for its boots or whatever and it spills and breaks. And we could do just that. But very important to realize that that's what you're doing, because then you don't get panicky about it. And the person who's going to press that button is the person who's going to be in panic. So if you realize that that's what it is, and that it doesn't really matter if the whole human race blows itself up, then there's a chance that it won't do it. That's the only chance we have. Not to do this thing which attracts us like a kind of vertigo, like a person who looks over a precipice and is all set to throw himself over. Or a person who jumps out of a plane when they're skydiving and forgets to pull the parachute ring because he gets fascinated with a target. It's called target fascination. He just goes straight at it, you see. So we can get absolutely fascinated with disaster, with doom. Or, all the news in the newspapers is invariably bad news. There is no good news in the newspapers. People wouldn't buy a newspaper consisting of good news. Even the free press is full of terrible news. Except the San Francisco Oracle. And the fascination, you see, for this doom might be neutralized if we would say, well, why bother about that? It's just another fluctuation in this huge, marvelous, endless chain of our own selves and our own energy going on. See, here's the problem. Because of our myopia, because of the way we've, as it were, restricted consciousness to focus upon just that certain little area of experience that we call voluntary action. That's us. And everything else happens to us. Now, that's obviously absurd. Let's suppose you take in your hand one of those toys, a gyroscopic top. And you suddenly notice, the minute you get this in your hand, that it has a kind of vitality to it. It seems to resist you. It starts pushing you in a certain way, see? And sometimes you're with it and following it. And then sometimes you see it. It's just as if you held a living animal in your hand. You pick up a hamster, or a guinea pig, and you hold this little thing in your hand, it's always trying to escape. So the gyroscope always seems to be trying to escape your hold. Now, in exactly the same way, what you're experiencing all the time, all sorts of things are getting out of control and doing things you don't expect. It's trying to escape your hold. All right, then don't grab it so hard. And you discover that this living thing that you're feeling, like the gyroscope top, it's your own life. Because you can see very simply that you would not understand the experience that you call voluntary action and decision, being in control and being yourself, unless in opposition to that there was something else. You couldn't realize self and control and will unless there was something other out of control, and instead of will, won't. It's the two together only that produces the sensation that you call having a personal identity. Only, there is a funny thing about human consciousness which has been worked out very carefully in Gestalt psychology, which is that our attention is captured by the figure rather than the background, by the relatively enclosed area rather than the diffuse area, and by something moving rather than what is relatively still. And to all those phenomena that in this way attract our attention, we attribute a higher degree of reality than the ones we don't notice. That's only because, for the moment, those are more important to us. Consciousness, you see, is a radar that is scanning the environment to look out for trouble, just in the same way as a ship's radar is looking for rocks or other ships. And the radar, therefore, does not notice the vast areas of space where there are no rocks, no other ships. So in the same way, our eyes, or rather the selective consciousness behind the eyes, only pays attention to what we think is important. I am at this moment aware of all of you in this room, of every single detail of your clothing, of your faces, and so on, but I'm not noticing it all. And therefore I will not be able to remember tomorrow exactly how each one of you looked and what you were wearing. Because what I notice is restricted to things that I think are particularly important. If I notice some particularly beautiful girl in the audience, then I might notice also what she's wearing. And that would be memorable. But by and large, you see, we scan things over, but we pay attention only to what our set of values tells us we ought to pay attention to. But quite obviously, you as a complete individual are much more than the scanning system. You are in relationships with the external world that on the whole are incredibly harmonious.
The question to my mind is the human being capable of dealing with this situation which he himself has produced?
What is this God? What is the consistency of God? This Brahman state, this absolute state. You see, if you give anything a name, it has a state. It has a presence. It exists. The name exists, you see. So is God a name? Is the name God what God is? We have a description, a name can describe a priest, and the priest, in our mind-based perception of what we have seen in images, is we have this picture of a priest. But we haven't got a picture of Brahman or God.
How can we hang on to a dream?
Whatever this God is, it's one, you see. It is actually before our idea, our mind-based idea. It is one, but in another dimension one. The mirror is all that exists.
The mirror is all that exists.
This field of unmeasurable, stainless, invisible stillness with infinite possibilities in this mirror. Regardless of its shape, its size, you don't really have to think about that. But they give it a name mirror as an idea, you see. But that's good, you see, because what God is a collaboration of super intelligence and knowing, or coming together. Phenomenal team. And you can call it God, Brahman, Absolute Source, whatever it is. It's nameless, you see. But this collaboration is a collaboration of something giving birth to itself. Now, a singular, particular one thing giving birth to itself. What can it do, you see? How can it do this without our dualistic man-woman, yin-yang, coming together scenario? Get it on again. Let's actually look at what it's made of. Again, these are named. So if there's pictures in your mind, I apologize. But consciousness is this thing that shrouds everything, and everything is born from. The mirror is all that exists.